Sound check. Hey, good evening, everybody. Dr. Nathan Thompson here with the Wellness Way Yorkville. Happy Monday, guys. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Um, if you're joining right now, thank you so much for joining me. Make sure that you say hello. Let me know where you're watching from as well. And thank you very much for joining me on this Monday night. So, tonight's topic is going to be a live question and answer. Hold your questions if you have them. I'll let you know when I want you to ask those questions. I'm going to talk about a couple of things before we go into question and answer. But tonight I'm going to be talking about some pretty awesome clinical results. Watch this one. This one will amaze you because I'm going to talk specifically about testosterone, why this is so important. Number two, I'm going to talk about the question I got about how do I improve your energy? And then, yes, I am going to be talking a little bit more detail on my thoughts on Charlie Kirk. And the reason why I wanted to expound on this a little bit more is to help you understand when people introduce new ideas and what happens behind that. So I am going to get a little bit compassionate tonight. Compassionate is just being passionate and also a little bit pissed off at the same time. So so forgive me if you don't like those words. Quite honestly, I don't care. So clinical results, how to improve energy, and thoughts on Charlie Kirk. We'll also have a time for you to ask a question, and I'll answer it in the order that it was asked. So let's go over with you first. A couple of pretty awesome clinical results. Okay, we call this win for the week. The reason why is because I talk a lot about ideas. I talk about doing things from a different perspective. And yes, once you gain a little bit of traction, you'll catch some flack from the higher ups, from the powers that be, from people who disagree, and all they say is, "Oh, but you're just a chiropractor, or you're just this, or you're just that." Especially when it comes from medical doctors, because heaven forbid you do something against and go against their golden calf. You'll see how upset that they actually get. So let's go over with you a couple of clinical examples, and what I would call a win for the week, because I exist in order to help people improve their lives. And in fact, that's one of the legacies that I want to leave, is that I made a difference in people's lives and that I made a difference in how people actually think. So this one right here, if you look at this win for the week, is I started working with this patient. This was a few years ago. Started working with this individual online, not online, but remotely, through phone consultations. And he was having kind of a struggle with certain things that were going on. And I remember he said, "What are the 5 main health concerns in order of importance?" He said, "I'm really struggling with anxiety. I'm really struggling with fatigue, a lot of digestive issues that were going on, and really, really poor sleep." So started working with him, and one of the first things that you have to do is you have to start addressing inflammation and things like that. And this is why one of the things that he started seeing is a lot of changes with his bowel movements and things like that. And so that's one of the first things that we really had to make sure that we got rock solid and whatnot. And we did. Okay. So his digestion, bloating, a lot of those issues really cleared up. And I said, "Hey, do me a favor, and let's start looking at your hormones and see where you're at, where you fall, with that." And so I remember testing, some of his hormones. We ran a male panel on this individual. And here's one of the interesting things is that if you look at his testosterone as being someone in his late 20s, early 30s, and you saw it was really at 389, which that's not great testosterone, especially for someone who is actually so young. So testosterone was just really suffering, at that point. And I remember looking at this, and then I looked at something that was really interesting, and I saw his insulin levels were so low. And I asked him this question. I said, "Hey, what's your body fat at?" And I obviously couldn't see him because, he was 1,800 miles away. And he said, "Oh, well, my body fat's really, really low. I mean, it's like at 5, 6%. And I've actually I've tested it." I said, "I want you to do me a favor. I think you're actually really, really under eating. And I think you're carrying a little bit too low a body fat. So, you know what I want you to do? I want you to eat more, eat a lot, not bad food, but I want you to increase your caloric intake quite a bit. I want you to see if you can actually start gaining some weight. And in fact, I want to see your body fat go from in the single digits, get it into the double digits, see if you can sit around 12, 13%. Let's see how you do with that. So he started doing that and actually started to eat more, not eat less, but started to eat more. And I just met with him, a couple of days ago, and I looked at his new lab markers, and it's been a little bit. I've talked to him once or twice, in between then. But then I looked at his testosterone levels and they were at 974. I said, "Holy cow, like what's this guy doing?" So I asked him, "Are you on any kind of testosterone replacement therapy?" He's like, "Oh, no, I would never put that junk inside my body." I said, "Well, I'm going to guess from looking at your testosterone levels that you've been doing pretty good. You're feeling pretty good. You're getting enough sleep, lifting heavy. How are you feeling?" He said, "Doc," he's like, "I don't know what to tell you, but my life is just completely different. It's completely changed." And he's like, "There's been other things going on that, you know what, I never ever told you about, but all those things have started to improve as well." So here's an individual that improved a lot of gastrointestinal issues and also increased his testosterone by over 250%. And during that time, he had also gained 20 pounds. Yes, he gained a little bit of fat, which I told him to do, but he's also gained a lot of muscle. And he's like, "I just stopped worrying about having a six pack." And this is why, if you've ever seen the video, if you ever follow me for a long period of time, I said, women, you don't need a six pack. And in reality, men, you really don't need a six pack either. And if you are going to have a six pack, you should cycle in and out of it. But I told him something that to him, it made a lot of sense. And I said, "Hey, you ever see anybody who's in a bodybuilding competition, and they go through the phase of bulking, so they eat a lot of food, they put on a lot of muscle mass, and then they try to shred or they try to lean down so that you can see all those muscles." He's like, "Yeah, I'm familiar with that." And then I told him this. I said, when a man leans down to such ungodly levels, trying to get down to 5, 6%, what do you think happens to their testosterone? He's like, "Does it decrease?" I said, "Yep, it absolutely decreases." And then after their competition, they just feed themselves all kinds of food and they'll see their testosterone levels start to go back up. He said, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." So he has worked on making sure that he's feeding himself enough and not worried about intermittent fasting, not worried about, trying to have a six pack all the time. And so during that time, he's gained 20 pounds and yet his testosterone naturally has gone up 250%. And you know what? This was without supplements or anything like that. This was just him following a really, really good lifestyle. So very, very important. And sometimes I wonder at a lot of these male, testosterone clinics or something that are popping up all over the place, if they're in fact looking at this and asking those questions, because the next one that I'm going to show you is going to blow you out of the water. Okay. Now, I also had another individual, this wasn't as long ago, who came in and he was complaining of a lot of chronic pain, a lot of fatigue, just like, "I just don't feel very good." And we ran a panel on him too. And we ran a little bit more than this as well. But this was, if you look at this individual in his early mid 40s, and you saw that his testosterone was sitting at 289, which is really, really low. Not a whole heck of a lot lower than a lot of women. And so, but one of the things that he really needed to do is he needed to lose a lot of weight. So we just retested him and I went over his results. So he started in the 200s, 289. And then, so we just looked at his new testosterone markers and now he's at 631. And this was over the course of about 5 months. And during that time, he's actually lost 50 pounds and his testosterone has improved 220%. Isn't that interesting? So he got older, but his testosterone improved. And you hear what they say is you get older, a man's testosterone is supposed to decline. No, it's not. So here, both of these men actually got older and yet their testosterone improved. Okay. Now here's the thing. One person gained weight, one person lost weight, yet both of them were able to improve their testosterone. So I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, wait a second. It's got to be some kind of protocol, right?" So which one is it? And here's my answer to this. It's neither. And the reason why is because you're not a protocol. You can lower testosterone by undereating. You can also lower it down by overeating. And so there's a big difference between the two. And you know what the biggest thing is having a doctor who knows the difference between those two. And so the people are always asking me about a protocol, about a protocol, about a protocol. And even other quote unquote natural doctors or functional medicine practitioners and things like that is that they're like, what is your protocol? And you know what the protocol is? A protocol is something you can memorize because you're too lazy to understand function. And in fact, there's a lot of doctors that are just really concerned about protocols and looking at this and just doing a this for that type approach. But the reality is, guys, you're not a protocol. You're not a protocol. The body is much more savvy than what they're trying to pin you under a rock and try to place you in some kind of category. So you can lower testosterone, by undereating or by overeating, and it was vastly different between those two different people. So if you look at one person gained weight, his testosterone went way up, and another one lost 50 pounds and his testosterone went way up. And that's because everyone is different and everyone is unique. Okay. So I will actually say this. This is one of the biggest things that I always tell people is your body wants to thrive. Your body wants to heal. Your body wants to adapt. So your job is to give it the best environment to be able to do that. And so, when people say, well, how do you get a person well? It's like, well, all right, here's the secret sauce. The secret sauce is you're going to look at the body in two different categories. You're going to think that it's just a machine and it's just supposed to break and fall apart. Or you're going to say the body is smart. The body is a self-healing, self-regulating organism that needs no interference. And it doesn't need to be interfered with, especially. But when people say, well, how do you get a person well? And I'm like, well, I want you to think of it this way, is that everybody is kind of like a bucket. And everybody through lifestyle, through stress, or what I talked about last week about the 3 T's, thoughts, trauma, and toxins, leading to inflammation is what actually fills up your bucket. So how do you get a person better? Well, if the body knows how to heal, then actually work on emptying out the bucket. And in the same way, teach a person how not to fill up a bucket, because once that bucket starts to fill up and starts to overflow, that's when you start to have abnormal physiology and symptoms and things like that. So the secret sauce is to understand what you are doing in order to fill up that bucket and know exactly how to be able to empty it out so that you stop filling that up. And in fact, this is the chiropractic principle right here, is that it's all due to thoughts, trauma, and toxins. And so start emptying out that bucket. When you start to empty out that bucket, you'll see that a person can start to heal, repair, and start to recover. That's exactly why we do the inflammation talk every 3 weeks on Tuesday nights. And so, guys, if you're watching this and you're from the Chicagoland area, please make sure you get to our next inflammation event. It's going to be Tuesday, a week from tomorrow, September 23rd at 6:00 p.m. This is an in-person event. And so this is why, if you can understand what inflammation is, where it is coming from, and what you can do in order to clear yourself a path for a healthy, productive, awesome life, then this is your in to start working with us in the Wellness Way approach, especially right here in Yorkville, Illinois. So this is why, guys, this is so important, because so many people don't know what's filling up their bucket. And if you understand, this is how you can start testing for it. This is how you can start figuring this is what's stressing the body out, start to remove it. And this is the beautiful thing about how the body starts to recover. But remember this is not a new idea, but the approach that we're taking is fairly new, which is why, myself and a lot of Wellness Way doctors catch a lot of flack on social media. I'll explain to you why that happens. But if you want to work with us directly and you want a better life for yourself, then all I want you to do is go onto our Linktree profile and click on that link. And the very first thing to show up will be the inflammation event. And if you click on that, that'll take you to our Eventbrite page. It'll take you 60 seconds to register. The only thing that we ask is that if you register, that you're committed to showing up. Okay. The only thing that I ask is that you're just a person of your word, which means if you say that you're going to do it, you are going to show up to that event. Please don't waste my staff's time. And if you want to come to that event, my staff will reach out to you and they'll confirm your attendance at that event coming up next week on a Tuesday. Okay. So let's get into live question and answer. And at this time, if you're watching, thank you very much for watching. Make sure, guys, that you also just say hello. Let me know where you're watching from as well. I see a couple of people have already commented from New Hampshire. Awesome. Dennis, who's on here quite a bit, thank you so much for joining us. And if you got a question, now's the time to ask that question. And I know I had a couple of questions from earlier on last week. And so I want to answer some of those things first. Dr. Nate, how do I improve my energy? How do I improve my energy? It's really inflammation, guys. It really is. And I want you to think of it from a little bit different perspective. Have you ever had the flu, or have you ever had COV, et cetera, et cetera? And when you had that and your body, your immune system was reacting to, a pathogen or to a foreign protein or whatever that is, then how did you feel? Were you bounding with energy, or did you want to lay down and want to take a nap? And that's why when I see people, and they're just like, oh, I'm just so fatigued, I don't have any energy. I'm like, well, you're probably running a high level of inflammation. You got to figure out where this is coming from and what you need to do in order to help lower that down. But anytime you got any kind of inflammation, think when you had the flu, you're not bounding with energy. In fact, you want to lay in bed and you want to sleep. The problem is that if you have the flu, then that should be resolved. But a lot of people are just running a lot of chronic inflammation that's just zapping them of energy, causing them to have fatigue, and causing them to have a life that's a whole heck of a lot less than what they were created for. Okay. Now, I will tell you this. I go through goals with our patients, and the number one goal of patients that I would say is that they say, I want to have more energy. And this is just because they say, I want more energy for my life. They say, no, no, no. I want more energy so that I can be a better dad. I want more energy so that I can be a better mother. I want more energy because God's got big things for me planned. And I want to make sure that I have the energy and I have the brain power to be able to accomplish those things. I would say the number one goal of patients is that they want more energy. And in fact, when you start handling inflammation first, one of the first things that start to come back is, in fact, your energy. Because if you start lowering down inflammation, energy is just going to get better. And in fact, that has a lot to do with your adrenal function, with certain hormones like cortisol not being converted into cortisone, which is an anti-inflammatory hormone. So there's a lot of reasons why that happens. Okay. So it's all about inflammation, inflammation, inflammation. Please get registered for that inflammation event that's coming up a week from Tuesday. Now, I had a lot of patients who just came into my office, and they were kind of a little bit bewildered, a little bit sad. And a lot of patients asked me about this. They said, Dr. Nate, what are your thoughts on the passing of Charlie Kirk? Okay. Now, I did an Instagram reel, and I did a reel on social media. Many people were, hey, like, thank you so much for speaking out. Thank you so much for giving your opinion on that. But I had a couple of people who were very angry, and they said, I'm unfollowing you because you supported him. And you know what my thoughts are? Or here's what I would say to those people. You can follow me or you can not follow me. I really don't care. I don't do this for followers. If I wanted a lot of followers, I probably would speak different. But I'm never going to change my message based on someone follow me or not follow me. Like a lot of churches will kind of temper their message just a little bit, make sure that they're not, offending the big donors and whatnot. For me, I'm like, I don't care. I'm always going to say what I believe is right, no matter what the outcome, no matter what the opinions of other people. And that's why I say you can follow me if you want or not. I really don't care. I appreciate if you do follow me, but if you decide not to, you don't need to announce your departure. So what are my thoughts on the passing of Charlie Kirk? I will say this, honestly, in all honesty, I've been pretty gutted about it. And not a lot of things upset me, but I will tell you this, it really, really upset me. It really, really did. Like, it just caused my soul to be very agitated. It was just very agitated. It was very, it's something changed within my soul. I remember talking to my wife about this. I've talked to my staff about this, and they've kind of said some of the same thing as well. But I want you to understand the whole context of this, because you know what? I've watched a lot of Charlie Kirk videos, and you know what? I know that he was a believer in Jesus Christ, and I know that you can cut out his tongue, but you know what? His life right now is way more glorious than it is on earth. And yes, you took him away from his wife, you took him away from his kids, and there is sadness that's involved with that. But you can cut out his tongue, but he has something in God's got something way more glorious in store for him. So uh, you can cut out the tongue of a person. In fact, this is what I'll say because I look for this quote because I remember it. When you tear out a man's tongue, you're not only proving him a liar, you're only telling the world that you fear what he might say, that you fear what he might say. And just remember, if you want to start a movement, then think that you are trying to scare people into shutting their mouths by unaliving someone. It doesn't work that way. And in fact, if you look at the early Christian church, that's why I said, I wish you would know something about history, but you probably don't know anything about history because, most people don't know their history. And if you look at the history of the early church, they tried to destroy people who were the early Christians. And so, they martyred them. And as a result, it just made people say, well, there's got to be some truth behind that. And then this is when this actually exploded. So I will tell you this, you're not going to win. You will not win because you cannot stop the truth and you cannot stop a right idea. And let me give you an example of this because this has been pervasive in human history. So I just, I don't know why people just don't learn their history or whatnot. But I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, who was a Hungarian physician back in the 1800s. And this just goes to show you when you introduce a new idea that people don't agree with. Okay. I'll go a little bit deeper here in just a second. But if you look him up, he was considered the savior of mothers. And here's one of the reasons why. Because this Hungarian physician back in the 1800s made a very astute observation. He noticed this because one of the biggest things that were happening to mothers is that they were dying from infection after delivering babies. And in fact, I think the total amount, I think there's a 12% death rate of women of infection after delivering a baby. So this was a very, very, going in to deliver a baby wasn't something like it was considered like, oh, no problem, no deal, you'll be out in just a second. But when they looked at this, his observation was this. Hey, I noticed that when the physicians are delivering babies, the death rate is a lot higher than if the midwives are delivering babies. In fact, it was so obvious that many of the mothers were suggesting that I only want my baby delivered from a midwife. So he said, okay, well, what's going on with this? And what's the difference? And why do they have a safer track record? And you know what his observation was? Was that the midwives were doing something very simple. They were washing their hands before they would stick their hands up a woman's vagina. The physicians, on the other hand, would go from the cadaver lab, come right in, deliver a baby. Their hands were filthy. And so they would just be introducing new bacteria within that mucous membrane. That's what they were doing. And so looking at this observation, and this was even before, they knew what bacteria were. This was before the quote unquote germ theory was actually well known. But as was just his observation, he said, physicians, you should wash your hands prior to delivery because it was an observation. It was proven. All the physicians had to do is just say, you know what, let's just start washing our hands. But when one of the things that happened is because they said, that's crazy. The science is settled. You don't need to do that. Show me your data. Show me your peer-reviewed evidence. And he didn't have any. All he had was he just had an observation. And so he was right. But then what happened was that he was bullied. He was castigated. He was so badly that eventually it made him insane. They threw him in an insane asylum where he was beaten and died from his wounds. So here's a man who had a new idea, who was absolutely right, and he ended up dying for his idea. And this just goes to show you introduce a new idea, how much resistance that you'll get from high ego people, which happen to be a lot of medical doctors, in my opinion. All right. So just remember this. All truth passes through three stages. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third is accepted as being self-evident. Okay. So what are my thoughts on Charlie Kirk? Well, he was just actually bringing up a universal truth, a time-honored truth. Charlie Kirk just said, I'm a Christian. I believe this, this, and this. And history has proven that when you do X, Y, and Z, history has proven that you're going to have a society that's actually going to work a lot better. And lo and behold, holy cow, the people who don't want to accept that, the people who probably are demon possessed, are the ones who wanted to take him out. So just remember this: if you speak the truth, you will be hated. And so all truth passes through three stages. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. Third is accepted as being self-evident. And listen, I will tell you this, is that, prior to him being assassinated, I had someone who on social media threatened my life. And I'm like, what did I do except have a different opinion, on this? And it infuriated this person so much that he said, if I lived closer, I would come, I would kill you, and I would throw you in a ditch. Literally told me that. And I hope I reported that, and I hope the authorities have him in custody. So, but just remember this, is that first what they'll do is they'll ignore you. And in fact, when I started speaking out, I was ignored. And if you've followed me for any long length of time, a lot of people don't realize that I did a video a few years ago about the COV, et cetera, jibby jab, and looked at pre and post immune system testing. And I was right. Everything that I said that was right, I said, if this is true, here's what's going to happen. And I was right. Boom, boom, boom. All of these different things happened. And once people started getting that, man, did I get death threats. Man, did I get ridiculed. And it wasn't from people who wanted to know the truth. It was from the very profession who actually ridiculed Semmelweis and who threw him in an insane asylum, eventually leading to his death. But I will tell you this. First, they'll ignore you until you start gaining some traction. Then you start gaining some traction. Then the next thing they'll do is they'll ridicule you. Let me give you a perfect example from today. You guys may not know this person, but I will encourage you, please know who this person is, because this is known as Aaron Suri. This individual is Aaron Suri, who is RFK's lawyer. Okay. Now, Aaron Suri appeared before Congress only because he said this. He said, when we look at the vaccine schedule today, there is not research to show safety and efficacy. There's no double-blind, clinically controlled, placebo-controlled trials. There's none. We can't find it. We've asked them to give it to us. They haven't given it to us, and we can't find it. And in fact, one of the things that he's doing is he started to expose the pharmaceutical industry and all the shenanigans that they are doing behind the scenes. But then the doctors will so desperately try to defend their narrative so much. And I will tell you this, these doctors, they don't know what in the world that they are talking about, because they certainly didn't learn this. They certainly didn't see the research behind it. They were just told it's safe and effective. And this is what most doctors, fell for, hook, line, and sinker, is they just believe the higher ups, the pharmaceutical companies, that said that they were safe and effective, when in reality, they weren't. And in fact, they weren't even taught or trained on how to look at, vaccine adverse events. I remember seeing a pediatrician online. He's like, I've given thousands of vaccines and I've never had an adverse event. I was like, you're lying. You are lying. Because you know why? I was affected by a vaccine adverse event because I got all my, when I was young, a pre-K, shots, which was a whole heck of a lot less than what kids are getting now. And within 2 days, suffered debilitating asthma, had to be taken to the ER in order to get breathing treatments, and then was giving a lifetime, basically prescription that I'll be on an inhaler or be on asthma medications for the rest of my life. And they said, we have no idea why this is happening. We have no idea. It's just genetic. That's all that it is. And meanwhile, I threw away my inhaler 25 years ago. Never needed it ever again. And nor do I suffer with terrible asthma, allergies, and also tons of ear infections and things like that. So if you look at Aaron Siri, he is actually putting people's feet to the fire, and in fact, taking a lot of flack for it. I'm very thankful that he's willing to actually stand up for the truth and actually start asking the right questions. So now here's the thing. If you're being ignored, they don't fear what you have to say. But as soon as you gain some traction, then they will start to ridicule you. And this is what I've seen on social media in regards to chiropractic, in regards to the wellness way. And I see that. And it's only because first they wanted to ignore you, saying, you can't make a difference. And then you start making a difference and starting to change the narrative. And then they'll ridicule you because they desperately don't want the narrative to change. So this is why, if you want to, my thoughts on Charlie Kirk is he was making a massive, massive difference. And you know what? In his death, he will make even more of a difference. I guarantee that will happen, because as soon as you start martyring someone for the truth, then you will see the movement grow, and grow, because you cannot stop the truth. You cannot do it. So are you taking a little bit of flack? Are you taking a little bit of ridicule? Here's my encouragement to you. Keep going. Well, why would I keep going? Because it's right. Because it's right. I'm going to get a little bit emotional because I always say this. I always want to stand for what is right. I will stand always for the truth, no matter what the outcome, no matter what the consequence. You can try to take away my license. You can take away my voice. You can take away anything. But here's the thing. I would rather die standing for the truth than live my life being just a quiet, compliant coward. I would rather lose my life standing up for the truth than to live my whole life being a compliant, complicit coward. I will never, ever bow to that. I will never, ever be a coward. I will always stand for what is right. I will always stand for what is true. So keep going, guys, because it's right. And just remember this. You cannot cancel the truth. You cannot cancel the truth. You cannot contain the truth. And in fact, when you do that, you will only grow the truth, especially. Okay. All right, guys. Let's go over with you. If you got a couple of questions, go ahead and make sure, guys, that you answer those questions, or you ask those questions right now. Let's take one from Dennis. Dennis asked a lot of questions. Is cadmium really a micronutrient? My biochemistry professor showed a list of micronutrients. Cadmium was on the list. Is cadmium really a micronutrient? No. Cadmium is actually a neurotoxin. And in fact, that's why think of, like, if you look at a lot of like painted toys from China contain a lot of cadmium. So if you look at some of the biggest neurotoxic type things, I would say lead, cadmium, and mercury. Okay. Lead, cadmium, and mercury. That's why, there is mercury in certain, what's, it's known as thimerosal. And all you have to do is go back, a half a dozen, dozen years or so. And it shows how all thimerosal is very toxic to the mitochondria. I saw a research article about that. And so metals and things like that, they don't belong anywhere in the body. They don't belong in the body. And this is why when people say, oh yeah, but there's mercury in tuna, I remember someone challenged me on that. I said, you know what the difference between mercury in tuna is and mercury in a vaccine? The difference is one, you eat and it's protected by a barrier. The other one is you inject it straight, bypass the barriers, and go straight into the body, which is the same way in which you look at aluminum. Aluminum will also be one of those as well. Okay. Oh, aluminum is very abundant. Well, there's a difference between eating aluminum and injecting it straight into your body. There's a big difference, because one bypasses the barrier and all the body's natural defenses. You can't just start looking, guys, at physiology. And in fact, many pediatricians they just don't understand that, because they just do what they're told. And this is the same way, going back to testosterone, is because, many, I'll even yell at functional medicine too, because, they're just really just rule followers and protocol followers. And they can't come up with any new ideas on their own. And in fact, they probably couldn't get themselves out of a paper bag unless you give them very explicit directions. And this is the same way. I remember this. I had an endocrinologist come to me, and here's what she said. I couldn't believe that she had said that. She said, listen, she's like, I'm just prescribing women birth control pills, metformin for weight loss. They all want these drugs, as GLP-1 agonists. They all want this. And she's like, honestly, I have no idea what I'm doing anymore. And this is coming from an endocrinologist who has residency, who, you know, did, you know, all of this training after medical school. And she still admitted to me, she was very honest. She said, I really just don't know what I'm doing. We're just giving people just drugs out the wazoo. I don't know. Really don't know what they're doing. And I said, if you learn what you need to do in order to get your health back, then chances are you'll probably realize that I really don't want to practice anymore. And you know what? It was so much of a slap in her face. She just immediately quit. She didn't want to know. She didn't want to know. In fact, she wanted just to close her eyes and go back to practicing how she was doing. And probably the biggest reason why is because there was a financial component to it. She said, if I do that, I'm going to lose my life, my income. I don't want to do that anymore. And I see a lot of people because I've had MDs. They've come in and they have said, I want to know what you are doing. And you know what I tell them? No, you don't, because once you understand what I'm doing, you're not going to want to practice anymore, because you're just going to realize that it can be so much better. It can be so much better. But here's the thing. When you start challenging the narrative of pharma, you start challenging the narrative of the things that are bringing people money into the system. This is why I tell people you'll never see the cancer industry change, because if they ever, started doing real things, tangible things in order to not only prevent cancer, but also to make sure that they're changing the physiology in order to make sure that it never ever comes back. One of the things that would lose is you would lose a multi-billion-dollar industry. You really would. It's the same thing when you talk about big government. People just, standing behind, oh, you can't shrink down government. And the reason why is because you look at how government has grown. A lot of people's livelihoods are all based on them being a quote unquote government employee. So why would they want to shrink down government? They just want it to be a huge bloated behemoth. Okay. So, all right, guys, any other questions? If you got any questions, just let me know right now. Thank you very much, Dennis, for the question. But no, cadmium is a neurotoxin. You want to stay away from that. Okay. You want to stay away from that. All right, Nancy, continue to follow your convictions and faith. Well, I tell you what, I will. All right. I will. Thank you so much. And if people don't know that, Nancy is my mother who follows. I love my mom and my dad to death. Not literally, but I love my parents very, very much. Thank you very much for teaching me the right way and to always stand up for my convictions and being very strong in my convictions. Thank you very much. You showed me how to do it, and I appreciate that very much. All right, guys, any other questions? So I will be live next week. This is a very busy week as well, because my wonderful wife, she holds a twice annual sale here in the area, and it's an absolutely huge sale. And she runs the whole thing and does just an amazing job. And so she's this whole week, she is working very hard to make sure that the sale goes well and that everything, has all her I's dotted and her T's crossed, everything like that. And so, during this week, it's a very busy week. I have to pull a lot of extra dad duty, which I signed up for, as well. But it's a very, very tough week. But I will be back next Monday, doing a live broadcast. And if you got any kind of questions, please make sure that you ask that question, or you can send me a direct message via Instagram, on Instagram or on Facebook or something like that. Send me a direct message. Kat has a great question, but go back and make sure you go over what I just said. So, Kat, how to become a patient. All right, I will tell you this, because right now, I just I'm not doing remote consults. So, Kat, if you are from the Chicagoland area ish, I will say, then just make sure that you go up to our Linktree profile, click on the link, and then you will see the inflammation event. So the way to become a patient is to be at the inflammation event. I'm not trying to punish people. I'm not trying to give them a bunch of hoops that they need to get through. But I will tell you this. I have a lot of people who are very interested in being a patient, but I don't want interested people being a patient. What I want people is to be committed, come hell or high water. I want my life to be better. I want my health to come back. And so be at that event to help you to understand why you're sick, why you're inflamed, and the first steps in order to start clearing a path of being a happier, healthier you. So if you're from the Chicagoland area, just go up and register for that inflammation event. I can't wait to see you there. But if you are not from the area, then I will say this, and I've thought about, opening up our, okay, so from Florida, right? So I see you chatting in the comments. If you are from Florida, you know what I want you to do? Kat, what I want you to do is go to thewellnessway.com. I'm going to type that in right now. I don't know if you see that on the chat on YouTube or not, but just go to thewellnessway.com. And then you'll see that there are some doctors that are in Florida. There's, Largo, Florida, which I think is next to Tampa Bay, Sarasota. There's some along the Gulf Coast, also in Orlando or St. Mary's, Lake Mary, I think, Florida, also there. And then two is I know that they also work remotely as well. So make sure that you go to wellnessway.com and you can reach out to those in Florida, and they can get you set up and they can work with you remotely as well. So I'm not trying to pass you off to them, but also my remote consult schedule gets very, very filled up quite a bit. And if I do open it up, I'll probably open it up to men only. And that's not to, that I'm against women or anything like that. But I understand this is that women are much more likely to change their lives than men are. However, I will say this, men are a lot more difficult to reach, but once they decide that they need help, they're not quitting. So they're just not quitting, but it's also a lot harder to get them to admit that they need help. So I know there's a lot of men who do need a lot of help, and whatnot, but if I do open it up to doing remote consults again, you guys will be the first one to know. So Kat, just go on to, thewellnessway.com, and then you will see providers. If you open up the map, you'll see that there's providers everywhere. Dr. Ryan Davis in Largo, Florida. Excellent. Awesome guy. You'll also see, some along the coast, Sarasota. There's probably 4 or 5 offices along there, and you can see them in person, or you can reach out to them to see if they can help you remotely as well. So thank you very much for your interest. I appreciate that's a great question. All right. Great question. Thank you very much. Make sure, guys, that you follow our page. Make sure that you share this video with other people, and so that way, the whole idea, of the Wellness Way is to have a different perspective on health. So it's all about having a different perspective. Having a different perspective is okay, but you'll know that there are some people who don't want you to have a different perspective. And you'll see that they will ridicule you just like they ridicule me. Just get ready for it. But to understand this, if you know that you are on the right side of truth, then they cannot stop it. You cannot contain it. So make sure that you follow our page. Make sure that you like our page. Follow us. We'll give you updates all the time. I got a lot of great videos that are going to be coming out throughout the week. But I will see you next week. We'll do a live video. If you have a topic, just leave in the comments below, or just make sure that you reach out to me and send me a message. And I always consider everything, although sometimes people give me topics that are just more of like, I have a question I want you to answer versus like a whole entire topic. So I'll make sure I come up with it, and we'll have awesome stuff. We'll always be giving you awesome content. So guys, be well, be blessed. We'll see you guys next week. Make sure that you like, share our videos. We'll see you very soon. Remember who you are, and make sure that you're praying for the family of Charlie Kirk. So I love all of you guys. I hope you guys have a great evening. We'll see you guys very soon.